Thanks so much for joining us, everybody, today. My name is Jonathan Arms. I'm the chief psychologist and founder of Capital Shift. Capital Shift is a business where we look at advancing leadership and business performance by working with clients, with people to gain a deeper understanding of how the mind works. And I know Jamie's super interested in that subject too. And it's fantastic that Jamie's here. He's such a wonderful guy, a wonderful guest. And Jamie's an internationally renowned speaker, writer, coach, consultant, and he works with individuals and organizations to uncover the unexpected benefits of clarity. The ultimate, he talks about the ultimate leverage point for creating more time, for making better decisions, for achieving meaningful results. Clarity, the mind. It's a wonderful subject. Now, today's discussion centers on a topic that is relevant to everybody. How do we deal with setbacks? How do we deal with stuff that goes wrong for us, either in our lives or in our business? And how do we use the understanding of the mind to transform that into success for ourselves? So whether you're an entrepreneur or a leader of a business or a manager in a business, or simply navigating the challenges of life, setbacks are something that we all encounter. Perhaps we have small setbacks like the car breaks down on the way to an important meeting, we can't get there in time. Or maybe there's a bigger thing like we've made a poor business decision that in hindsight we really shouldn't have done. And that's caused some disruption for us and isn't quite as successful as we'd hoped. Now, we're going to get these setbacks, but what really matters to us is how we respond to them, how we see ourselves in the context of those setbacks. So during this discussion, Jamie and I will explore how to both prevent setbacks from derailing us entirely, but also how do we turn that experience into an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for change and innovation and progress. Because in so many ways, a setback is a disruption of our thinking. And sometimes it's when we disrupt our thinking that we find opportunities, we find new ways of doing things. So we will discuss that. And I think as we go through this great conversation, I hope we'll uncover how understanding how the mind works plays a pivotal role in transforming those challenges into successes. So we're talking about setbacks, Jamie. When we're talking about setbacks, it's quite a good idea to get to understand what we mean by a setback. So when you're thinking about a setback, either for yourself personally or in business or in leadership, what do we mean when we're talking about a setback?
Well, it's so interesting. As I knew you'd ask that because you told me you would, and so I started reflecting on it. And the first thing that came to mind is a buddy of mine years ago used to work for a company called InBev, and a huge booze manufacturer and distributor. And it's owned by a billionaire called Carlos Cepera, who's, I think, Brazil's richest person. Anyway, my buddy, Simon, got a chance to interview Carlos Cepera for 15 minutes. And one of the questions he asked him was, how do you deal with obstacles? How do you deal with setbacks? And Cepera got reflective, and then he said something that I found shocking. He said, I don't see setbacks. He said, my vision is so big that every obstacle is a stepping stone carrying me to what I want to create. Mm. And I think that he struck something deep that's not just relevant to people who have a vision of, sending rockets to Mars or that sort of thing, but it's fundamental to this whole question of setbacks. The word setback implies that there's somewhere we're going, right? Mm. That we've been interrupted in some way on that journey. And so the question then becomes, in order to even make sense of this idea of setbacks, obstacles, whatever, it asks the question, okay, where are you going? And that asks the question, what's important to you? What matters to you and for you in your work, in your life, in whatever endeavors you're undertaking, right? And so As I sit here reflecting on your question, I think of a couple of things. Like there's the very obvious framing of setback. It was, like I was, trying to mow the lawn and I accidentally ran over the lawnmower cable and now my lawnmower doesn't work. That's
Right.
a setback, but that's, a practical matter. But it seems to me that it certainly in the domain of when I'm coaching high performance individuals and that sort of thing, setbacks have a really interesting function, which is if there's one of the things they show us is sometimes where what we're setting out to create isn't aligned with what matters most to us. And so it can be a beautiful pointer to point us back to what do I really want? What's real, what really matters to me? What am I inspired to create? All that sort of thing. But the other thing that I think is very powerful in setbacks, and this is a concept that my girlfriend, my beloved Emma McDevitt, helped me see more clearly. She has there's a book by Jocko Willink called Extreme Ownership, and the idea of it is one that is kind of quite well known in a number of traditions, which is in any domain, including your life as a whole, either you are sovereign, meaning you take responsibility for absolutely everything that happens to you, or you're playing some flavor of victim. And the three famous flavors of victim are, blamer, rescuer, and victim. It's like, oh, life's so unfair, or you son of a bitch, I'll get you, or let me help you. Those are flavors of victim, right? And the idea, if you're living, if it makes sense to you to live a sovereign life, to live a life of high agency, where you literally can't be a victim. And,
Mhm.
it's interesting, the understanding that you and I both share, which is, my framing of it would be, and this is what I say to individuals and businesses and people I'm coaching is the two most valuable things you can discover are how your experience is created and who you really are. Now, my assertion is if you discover either or both of those, what you will also discover is you can't be a victim. It's literally impossible for you to be a victim of circumstance or anything else. And if you can't be a victim, then the whole game of life, the game of business, the game of creating, the game of navigating the emerging future that's unfolding in front of you is one where you can't be a victim and you are fully high agency and you own all of it. So if you can't be a victim, then a framing, which I find very valuable, is whatever comes your way, whether you call it a setback, an obstacle, a damn bit of bad luck, all of it is material for your transformation, material for growing you into the fullest expression of who you really are. And so Emma came up with this idea of material for transformation. She didn't come up with it. I mean, it's rich through many different traditions, but the idea that, Nietzsche's framing of it was what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And to me, that's a very, while fairly hardcore, it's a profound acknowledgement of the anti-fragility at the heart of who we are. We live in a world where for the last little while, particularly, but for quite a while, perhaps, the popular framing of setbacks in certain domains is that the world is full of toxic events of one sort or another, that if you encounter one of them, they will throw you into PTSD and they will interrupt what would have otherwise been a blissful and uninterrupted life. And the idea that these events are that you're gonna be a victim of these things, it's not true. It's not that people can't experience PTSD. They sometimes do. I've worked with policemen and other people around that. But one of the biggest contributors to PTSD is a feeling of isolation and the reinforcement from professionals and modern culture that you can be broken or damaged in some way. Jonathan, I got a email one day from someone, an American service personnel, who she wrote to me. She said, I just finished reading your book, The Little Book of Clarity, or maybe it was Clarity. She said, I've had PTSD for 10 years, and I've had all kinds of psychiatric treatment and been around the houses. No one ever told me that I wasn't broken. She
Mm.
said, I've read your book and I don't have PTSD anymore. I'm still in touch with her. And to this day, like, she's living a life she loves and all that sort of stuff. And she just got over it when she realized there was nothing wrong with her. Still
Mm.
took her a while to get, to recalibrate her life from that place. So anyway, that's sort of around the houses. But the bottom line I'm wanting to say is, what is a setback? We all have plans and things we're setting out to do, and things don't go the way we had planned. Well, that's often a gift, right? Because often my ideas of what I want to create are orthogonal or opposite to what life wants me to create. So part of the game for me is getting more and more in touch with what is it that I most deeply want to bring into being in this world, in this one life.
So I love that, Jamie. And so what, as a sort of summary, let's see if I can do that. What I think I heard you say was that you can have some practical setbacks, and I love your example of running over the lawnmower cable. But
not recommended, by the way.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do this at home. And because of course it's a setback in the fact that you have to repair it or get a new one, right? So there's an event that might have happened on practical terms that you have to deal with. But the majority of what we're talking about with setbacks is an experience that people have, which is an internal experience.
Yeah.
Which then is not so necessary if we don't see ourselves as the victim, if we don't get caught up in too much expectation. I love the phrase expectation is premeditated disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, well, we're thinking through what we're already not going to get. And we're setting ourselves up. And also the rather beautiful and deeper point, which is that it's only a setback if we have something very kind of deeply ingrained in our thinking that we need to get somewhere. Whereas if we're just in a journey and experiencing that journey, which I know is a phrase that nobody particularly likes, the idea of journey, but we are in this kind of momentum through our lives. We all want to do better. In our lives, we want to experience life more fully and richly and reach our potential. But the goals that sometimes we set ourselves are the things that then lead us to thinking the setback is a bad thing, as opposed to something which is informing us about what we really do need and want in our lives.
Well, yes, and
yeah,
there are goals worth having. Like I met up with my team we went to Genoa in Italy for a 3-day strategy session. And what emerged from that strategy, this is like 2 weeks ago, what emerged from that strategy was a new massive transformational purpose and mission and vision. And so the massive transformational purpose that arose was our purpose is to champion the wisdom, connection, and intelligence in every person, right? So that right away, that's a purpose that we can live from day to day. So then the mission that arose from that was our mission is to facilitate each person in having a direct experience of who they really are, the wisdom and intelligence that resides at the heart of their being. So that's a big mission, right? So then our vision is to create a protocol to transmit, to facilitate that direct experience, to transmit it, to stabilize it, and an organization to propagate that. Well, that's a huge vision. There's going to be multiple, and it feels very aligned with the wisdom and intelligence of life, but there's still going to be setbacks. So I don't want to imply, a lot of times I hear people, especially people who have explored spiritual understanding, it's like, oh, if I really understood who I really am, then no goals would matter. There are things that matter. There are things that are important. There are things that are valuable. So to me, this looks super practical, not just for having a nice life, but also for creating stuff in the world. And there's stuff that you will be deeply inspired to create. And as you said about doing that, you're going to have to do hard stuff. And some of that will feel like setbacks. And that's an opportunity to grow. It's not necessarily an opportunity to go, oh, I guess that wasn't it. It's an opportunity to grow. So this, to me, life's a combat sport or a contact sport. Like, it's full contact. We don't have to be afraid of, like, one of the most powerful things I ever heard from the philosopher Sydney Banks. He said, if the one thing people learned was not to be afraid of their experience,
Mm.
that alone would change the world. Like,
Mm.
setbacks are an opportunity for us to see what's here for me. What's here for me in this setback? How can I grow? How can I use this as a stepping stone in the service of what's most aligned for me? Whether that's the path I had a setback on the way to, or whether it's some slightly different path.
So we've got the goal, and I love what you say, because it gets very tempting to think that it might sound like there's no such thing as a setback, but of course we have things that stop us from progressing or slow us down sometimes from progressing to where we want and need to get to. But there's something about the way that we respond to those that makes the difference. And when we have a deepening understanding of the fact that we can only be a victim if we believe we're a victim.
Well, and it's the most natural thing in the world to feel like a victim at times, because that's the world we've been conditioned for. We've been our media, our upbringing, our school system, probably our parents. We've to greater or lesser extent, we've picked up the idea that we can be a victim of circumstance or whatever. So that's not optional. We're gonna get caught up in that. It's about being able to catch that and realize what's more important to me, sitting in the feeling of victimhood or orienting with that sovereignty and alignment.
Well, one of the things that I found myself sometimes helping people see in coaching conversations, if they're feeling a victim of circumstance, it sometimes surprises them and sounds quite harsh, but I try to point out how much ego there is in being a victim.
Does that help?
It's quite shocking sometimes, because, of course, if you're in that place of being a victim, you don't always feel like you're being egotistical. You feel like you're being the opposite of egotistical. But
sure,
there's a huge amount of ego, because the ego, of course, is, as we know, thinking and talking about self. And when you're thinking and talking about yourself as a victim, there's a lot of ego. So that's kind of helpful for people, because like, oh my goodness, I didn't actually think that I was, playing out my own story here as a victim. Now I can see past that. Perhaps I can relax a little bit with, recognizing that, okay, maybe I am okay. Maybe I have got a sense of well-being and a sense of self that sits behind that worry about who I am. And that would lead me to being able to see myself through setbacks more easily, because they're just changes in direction. They're not disastrous. They're just a change in direction, which might actually provide us with an opportunity. It's like being on a car journey, isn't it? You get a diversion, you go off on the diversion, and you find yourself driving past a beautiful castle or a beautiful shop that you can pop into you've never been to before. The setback provides you with opportunity that you perhaps didn't know.
Well, and I really love what you said, Jonathan. And the thing that struck me as I'm listening to you, it seems to me that waking up to the truth of who you are and kind of living as much as you can from a knowing of that is the antidote to the belief in separation and victimhood and that sort of thing. And by the way, if you'd have said to me 10 or 15 years ago, Jamie, you want to avoid being a victim as a business owner, you want to avoid being a victim. It's not going to be good for you or for business. I'm like, I'm never a victim. I never feel like that. But here's the thing. I was very blamey, right? Well, that's just a tough guy's flavor of isn't it? A bit of victimhood.
Yeah.
So feeling like, for me, that's victimhood. Feeling like, those idiots, why didn't they do it the way I told them or whatever? That's victimhood.
Yeah.
Feeling like, oh, if only I could help that other person, then everything would be okay. That's victimhood. That's all the outside in misunderstanding, the mistaken belief that we're feeling something other than our own perceptual systems in the moment.
I was going to pick up with that on with you, Jamie. So when you've worked with leaders and coaching leaders and people in business, have you seen common patterns in the way that they they find themselves in this victim space or this setbacks? Have you seen common patterns to how
Yeah.
people in business end up seeing setbacks as a negative?
Yeah, I mean, the one of the big ones that I've seen, I'll tell you a couple. So I was doing an intensive, a 3-day intensive with a client who owned a very successful startup, probably about 30 employees, doing a decent turnover, that sort of thing. But he was working 14 to 18 hours a day. He had a newborn kid who he never saw, working 7 days a week. And he was overwhelmed with stress. And not only that, his team, he found them very frustrating. They didn't seem to listen to him. They didn't seem to do what he wanted them to do, all that sort of stuff. So he came to me for this intensive. And he very much saw it as something for himself. And if there were knock-on benefits to his business, that would be great. But his presenting issue was stress. And it's interesting, actually. There's a piece of research published in the Harvard Business Review called, I think the title of the article is How State of Mind Affects Your Performance.
Mm-hmm.
And these three researchers, Kaled, Hirschberg, and Petty, interviewed 730 leaders from companies around the world. And they did something very simple with them. They gave them a list of different states of mind, ranging from euphoric, ecstatic, elated, to neutral, to stressed, to tired, to hopeless, to desperate, to depressed, all these different states of mind. And they got them to just identify where they spent first of all, where they spent most of their time. Secondly, what were the states of mind that seemed to correlate with high performance for them? And what were the states of mind that correlated with negative performance? So what they found was that the states of calm, happy, and energized directly correlated with high performance and were also transmitted to team members. So it resulted in high performance from the leader and high performance from their team. The states of frustrated, angry, tired, and stressed correlated with low performance, negative morale impact, but occasional short-term wins. So there was sometimes some short-term benefit to the actions they took from frustrated, angry, tired, and stressed, but long-term devastating to the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so often when I'm working with a leader, I'll start off by showing them that chart. I'll just show them this chart with different states, and I'll ask them to I call it the impact elevator. And I'll ask them to identify where on the elevator are you just honestly, where are you spending most of your time at the moment? And one of the patterns I'll see is stress. So that's what I saw with this entrepreneur. So I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. I put up a flip chart in the front of the room, divided in two. And on the left-hand column, I wrote your theory of stress. And I said, I want you to write down all the things that are causing you stress. And he wrote, okay, there's my business, my team, the bank and the loans they've given me, my uncles and the loans they've given me, plus the pressure they're putting on me to perform, plus the competition, plus the customers, plus by the end of plus I've got this newborn baby, don't you know, and my wife wants me to be at home more and blah, 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 blah. By the end of his list, which he spent about 45 minutes or an hour talking through, there were 30 things on the list that were the cause of his theory for where his stress was coming from. I said, okay, got it. And I let him know, okay, I understand you. I understand you. I said to him, I said, are you comfortable that I get your world with this? And he said, yeah, I think you understand. I said, great. I said, would you like to see my theory of where your stress is coming from? He says, sure. So I wrote at the top of the right-hand column, Jamie's theory of your stress.
Mhm.
100% of your stress is coming from the principle of thought taking form in this moment, right now. 0% is coming from anywhere else. And he heard that and he looked at that and he got really quiet. And he goes, I'm going to have to go away and think about that. So he goes out for lunch. He comes back after lunch, picks up a red pen, and he puts a big red X through his list of stressors. He says, I get it. I've been doing this to myself. I can't believe it. He goes, what are we going to do with the rest of the 3 days? Because that was the lunchtime of the first day. But here's the interesting thing. We had a great 3 days and kind of stabilized what he was seeing and explored it. But the interesting thing came at our first check-in a week later. I said, how's your first week back at work been since the intensive? He said, it's been amazing. He said, while I was away doing my intensive, my team raised their performance by about 50%. And the fact of the matter is, once he was in his business without all that stress, anxiety, worry, pressure, frustration, his team responded to him completely differently. So that's a pattern I see again and again and again.
Yeah, it's a fantastic example of a pattern. And I was just thinking, actually, as you were talking through that example, Jamie, I've just come back from a two-day executive strategy session, and we were doing all sorts of stuff, right? Business stuff, strategy stuff around them working as a team, as a high-performing team, and what they needed to look like and be like. And on the second day in the morning, I decided to talk to them about insight and what an insight was, and how an insight differs from intellectual learning. And as we both know well, there's something deep about the insightful learning experience. Something shifts at a sort of deep, felt, soulful level. Whereas an intellectual learning process it feels neck up. It feels like it's happening in our heads. An insight feels like it's happening somewhere in our bodies and shifts our world in a way that intellect doesn't. And we realized they realized, group of 7 people, that the previous day was full of insight. And it was full of insight as a result of them having had the opportunity to get quiet themselves, to recognize. We hadn't talked about the mind at all, by the way. We hadn't discussed how the mind works. It wasn't the agenda. But because we were allowing that space, they were allowing that space in themselves. They were dealing with the problems and issues and challenges which they faced as an organization, a pretty big organization. And their business turnover is, I don't know, I think it was 250 million, and they were looking to have an uplift of 50 million that year, and they were looking at ways of doing that. So it's a fairly significant piece of work. And the answers, if you like, they were setbacks or they were challenges, they were issues they were dealing with, but the answers were coming from that insightful space within them, that place where they were allowing new thought. So I think it's so important for us to recognize that when we understand something about the mind and how the mind works, it opens up the door to new thought, to new ideas, to resolve those setbacks, to resolve those challenges, and use the information that we have available to us, the potential that we have available to us to turn those setbacks into a successful outcome. And what was so cool, the last point I wanted to make on that was, what was very cool for this group was they'd only ever up until this point tried to resolve the setbacks with the intellect.
Yeah.
They ground away at it, to try to to solve it with calculations and
Yeah.
and actually, if they couldn't do it, they just did it harder and they did more of it harder and faster and ended up burning themselves out, because they just couldn't find the solutions from the intellect. It wasn't in the intellect. The intellect was providing them with the same thinking that they'd had, but more of it. And it wasn't until they quietened down in themselves to allow new, fresh, different thinking into their conscious awareness that they could then come up with some alternative solutions. So setbacks were not setbacks when they weren't being gone at with the sort of tenacity of the intellect. It was always they had to stop, settle their thinking, have some sort of recognition of their own well-being, and then come at it with new thinking.
Yeah, and you'll find almost every business has a series of kind of impossible problems that they've been trying to tackle and not getting anywhere with. And it's almost a cliche, isn't it? That old Einstein quote of "you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it." And yet,
Yeah.
when I think about insight, I see insight and realization in a couple of ways. One is it's clearing away misunderstanding. It's clearing, a fresh new realization or insight is clearing away the obstacles and setbacks in how we're seeing the world. Because how we're seeing the world is never reality. It's always our version of reality. And that's great. Like on the one hand, the perceptual reality you've been running on so far has got you this far. So, great news. But when we run into setbacks and they kind of get us down or whatever, or they, befuddle us or resist solution, it's because we're trying to solve them with a perceptual reality that doesn't have the answer in it. And so one of the ways I see insight and realization is it's a subtraction of an old way of seeing the world that allows something new to emerge. And the other way I think of them is an insight is a hit of fresh new perceptual reality. It's not, I don't see it as a good idea or something. Or even as new thinking. It's a new perceptual reality. And a metaphor for this that people might click with is like if you have a computer, you'll sometimes get things saying, update, that this fixes the following bugs and it's a patch for the following things. Click here to install. Well, if you click here to install, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. It's just downloading new software and new, fixes and bug fixes. And that's an insight, like the idea part of the insight, like, I suddenly realized blah, 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 blah. That's the sticker on the box that the update came in, but that's not the update. The update is fresh, new perceptual reality.
I love that, and what I really like about that example, I've not heard that one. I might steal that. Thanks.
Feel free.
Is that you don't have to know what goes on in the background. That
You couldn't know, like
Yeah.
you like it's sort of like I'm looking at you as we're doing this Zoom. People are listening; they won't see us, but I can see you, but I can't really see you. I can see pixels on the screen that are generated by the deeper processes in my computer and your computer and the protocols in the internet and all that sort of stuff. I don't even want to know about that stuff. And it's the same with your perceptions of the world and your thought process. You don't want to even know what's going on behind the scenes. It's so deep. You couldn't even imagine it. So it's like we can never be aware of everything that's going on in generating a perceptual reality. That's why I think of these principles you and I talk about as being formless. You can't. It's what's being, just like if I'm having an experience of you on this screen, Jonathan, it relies on me not noticing the pixels. The more my attention is on the pixels, the more I'm not seeing you. Well, thought is the principle of thought is like the pixelation of our perception. Like, and it's shocking for people to realize, like, I'm not talking about your thinking. I never talk about your thinking. I'm like, as you look around whatever room you're in right now, it's shocking to realize that, because it seems from the inside like we're looking out through our eyes at a world out there, and in a very practical way we are. But at a neurological sense, and this is old neurology, we're living in an internally generated hallucination. We're living in an internally generated 3D perceptual reality. And that includes not only the world around you, wherever you're sitting or standing, it also includes any conceptions you have about past or future or visions or goals or setbacks. It's all being generated real time in this hot second. And that's not an issue. The issue is it doesn't seem like that. It seems like there's more to it than that.
Yeah, and as you were talking about that, I reminded of thank goodness for Einstein. We'd be short of quotes if we didn't have him. But the Einstein quote: "Everything is energy. This is not philosophy. It's physics."
Yeah.
Which I adore, because of course there's the absolute reality to that. So how does that help us with setbacks then? So we've got this notion where we are with reality, where we are creating our worlds through our thought, which is happening in our conscious awareness, and we create a massive whole world that looks real to us through that power of thought. Some of which are setbacks, and there's a practical element to that setbacks where we have to go and buy a new lawnmower. And then there's other elements which are less important for us to follow up, but we get very caught up in, which are internal ones that seem devastating or challenging or difficult, but are actually just opportunities maybe to see the world differently. What I was hoping you might do, Jamie, is are you able to share a pivotal moment in your own personal journey? I'm jumping you with this question.
Sure.
Where you've had a setback and it's become an opportunity for you. I mean,
yeah, totally. Okay, so I'll give you one. So
yeah.
So in 2019, I had this intuition that the whole world was going to move much more online very soon, and we've been running many of our courses with live streaming and that sort of thing. So I said, in 2020, we're going to double down on live streaming, and we're going to make it so that everything we do is live stream, and we reserve live in person for very, very premium events like retreats or like the final module of our clarity certification training and that sort of thing, and that sort of thing. So that was our strategy. And then in March 2020, COVID hit, and I suddenly the whole world changed. So all of us went into 2020 with a vision of what 2020 was going to be like. And it's funny, Jonathan, I ran a masterclass a few weeks after COVID hit, maybe even in just a couple of weeks, called Navigating Times of Volatility, Uncertainty, and Complexity. And I said, at the beginning of that, I said, it's kind of a joke calling this a masterclass. I said, because no one's a master of what we don't yet know. All we can master is being willing to step into the unknown. I said, and we talk about 2020 as it's now unfolding, with lockdowns and all that sort of thing, as being a time of uncertainty. But what it really is the end of an illusion. You had an idea of how 2020 was going to play out, and your idea has been massively confounded. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we explored that a bit, but I had a very practical point for myself, which was my clarity certification training runs January to July. And I had a sudden big question, because that's one of the main income generators for our business. I had a sudden question, which is, I don't even know if people are going to want to do these kind of large programs. I don't know. Now that we're in this new world, I don't know. So I was like, oh, that's a big setback. So I'm like, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? I'm going to find out. So I'm going to see if I can half fill the program in March, which was unprecedented. Like, we never start selling that program until closer to the beginning. But I said, I'll see if I can half sell it in March, and that'll give me some data. So I did, and it did. We were like, oh, we've got half the places filled. Okay, so I guess people do want to do this. Well, 2020 turned out to be a bumper year for us, probably one of our best years ever in terms of, revenue and all that sort of stuff. But then here's the interesting thing. In December of that year, I fell ill. Some kind of cold or flu, or maybe it was COVID, or who knows. Um, and when I get ill, historically, I'll get ill for 24 hours max, or sometimes for a week or two if I really need a rest. So I fell ill for a couple of weeks, and then my symptoms cleared up, but all my energy was gone. Now I'm used to having tons of energy, and there's an old saying in the stock market, which is about trading on leverage, which is when the tide goes out, you can see who's been swimming naked. Uh, and so when the tide of my energy went out, I saw all the places in my business where I'd been making up for a lack of process or procedure or having the right people in place just by throwing more energy at it. Well, it was a huge setback because suddenly I couldn't do that. But I was like, okay, this is a turning point then, because what I could also see is that habit of just throwing more energy at stuff, which I could do because I had a bounty of energy, was a form of laziness, right? So I kind of had to get real with that. And so just being with that, finding out, okay, how do I continue to be true to my mission and my purpose and my vision when I don't have anywhere near the energy that I had? Well, it meant aligning. It meant and it meant starting to stop doing certain programs that weren't fully aligned, stop running certain processes that weren't fully aligned. So it was incredibly clarifying. And where I am now, and this is like, that was December 2025. So we're like 2020, it was beginning of 21. So that's 4 years ago. The last 4 years have been an incredible recalibration and transformation and purification. It's meant me taking more responsibility and ownership for myself. It's meant me having a new team around me and letting go of stuff that I used to do myself. So it's made me have to be a better leader and a better team member and to live in a better feeling for life.
Yeah, yeah. It's so funny. I had no idea what you were going to use as an example, but
Me neither.
I mean, I was going to use my example if you didn't have one, which was almost the replica of that, in that it was a COVID experience where we were delivering face-to-face workshops. COVID hit. I had a whole bunch of things in the diary plan for the whole year that had to just be struck out. And there was a moment, and I just want to talk to you about this for you, but for me, there was a moment where it was like, oh, okay, so I've got some options here. One is I just, let's go and walk the Southwest Coast path. Let's just take the time out that we've got here and to do something. I'm not sure we could have done that with lockdown anyway, but that was the thinking at the time. Or let's rethink. And I went through, very similarly, I suppose, a rethink. And what has fundamentally changed the nature, the medium through which we teach now and work, which is much, much more online. We've developed this beautiful online course, the Thought Intelligence course, which we'll send out to everybody on the call to have a look at. And it's shifted the way that we've operated. The bit I wanted to just discuss with you, I think people will be interested in, is that moment in time where you have the thing, the setback. In this time it was COVID. Yes, we all had the same setback, but it had an impact on our business differently. And we had to shift from it being a negative to something which was an opportunity, or at least not a negative.
Yeah.
How did you do that? What was your thinking, for people to hear and understand the process, if you like?
Well, step one was really easy. Step one was I freaked out, and I don't think it was just a moment. It was probably a good 24 hours. I'm like, fuck, what am I going to do? Da, 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 which is really natural because the thing is, I mean, for me anyway, I put a certain amount of time, energy, and an effort into setting up things and structures and things run in a certain way. We all do that in our own ways, even if it's just the structures of our life. And then when there's an unexpected change, then you know, so, the metaphor that comes to mind. I once read a book called Uncoupling, which was about divorce, and it said at the beginning that the challenge is in when a couple divorces, one of them has a secret, which is that they're no longer invested in the marriage, and when the other person finds out, it's like the future they had mapped out suddenly is left with a black space.
Loss
And
of the dream. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and
Kind of.
it's the same with grief. Often people have a vision. We all, to some extent, to exist in this world, it helps us to have a vision of a future, right? So we've all got some kind of guess at what the future is going to hold, right? And so the challenge with setbacks, especially what we might call extreme setbacks, like loss of a loved one or unexpected, breakup or health issues or whatever it might be, is all of a sudden the future that had looked a certain way has a bit of a black hole in it,
Mm.
which is scary because, we've evolved for a world of objects and actions and experience, right? We've evolved for a physical world, and our kind of prehistoric nature knows that if there's a black hole in front of you, stand still. Like you don't want to move forward necessarily in one of those. So the thing that's been profoundly valuable to me, Jonathan, is there's a book I love. Oh, I've got it right here, called The Missing Link by Sydney Banks. And in the introduction of that book, he said, the introduction's only one page. He says, there are those in this world who believe miracles do not happen. I can assure such skeptics that they do. With hope and faith as beacons, anything can happen. Now, the reason I say, and the reason I believe that the two most valuable things you can discover are how experience is created and who you really are, is that those are the source of hope and faith, hope and the feeling of love and connection, and faith that it works the way that you've realized it works rather than the way our conditioning tells us it works. Because our conditioning tells us that the world works in a way that it doesn't actually work. So it really helps to have a glimpse of how it truly works that you can navigate by when the times get tough. And you will have tough times. There's I don't think anyone, as Jim Morrison said, no one here gets out alive. I believe that's the case. And so we'll all have tough times of one sort or another. The issue isn't to avoid all tough times. It's funny, Jonathan. I mentioned our innate anti-fragility. There's a wonderful book that I love called Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb. And he makes the point that our muscular systems and that sort of thing are anti-fragile, which is they're helped by volatility. I know you're a long distance runner. Going out for a long distance run, if I went for a 10-mile run, I might very well keel over today, but you've been training at it, so you can do it. You're anti-fragile to that. I love lifting weights. So lifting weights, I'm damaging my muscles, but then they heal back stronger. So, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Well, Taleb makes the fascinating counterpoint, and it's this. If the anti-fragile is something that is helped by volatility, the anti-fragile is harmed by lack of volatility. So the attempt to avoid all setbacks actually harms you. And there's something really, really powerful about being true. It's why I feel like it's, there's one of my favorite quotes of all time is by Steve Jobs, who said, above all, have the courage to follow your heart and your intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. So the question then becomes, what stops people following their heart and their intuition? And it's fear of getting it wrong, fear of the setbacks, fear that it won't work, fear that they're not enough, all that sort of stuff. And that's why it takes courage, right? And so I think that there's something profoundly liberating about this understanding, which is that, well, obviously, do whatever due diligence you need to to do and plan accordingly for trips and that sort of thing. There's a way in which you're capable of far, far more than you think. And you don't have to organize your whole life or business by trying to avoid setbacks. If you follow what you know to be true, what you know to be compelling, what you know to be meaningful for you, and jump into it and go for it. You will have setbacks. And each of those, to Sapara's point, my vision is so big that I don't see obstacles. I don't see setbacks. Every setback is a stepping stone to what I'm setting out to create. I just love that framing.
It's good. And it's, yeah, okay. You use the word framing right at the end there. What I was going to say was, uh, that when a setback occurs, so you had this setback with your business at the beginning of COVID, you had a very natural automatic response, which was like, oh shit, this is like I did. It's like, oh my God, this is going to absolutely, whack me for one here. But what traditionally we've been taught to do in those situations, if we've studied anything around positive psychology or managing self or so on, is to then transfer that, frame that, change that thinking into positive thinking in some way to moderate, fix, try and adjust it. But of course, we've not been terribly successful with that as a species, because that's why people keep writing books about how to do that, because nobody's actually written one that is kind of it works. Because of course we try to do it, but then it doesn't deal with the underlying issue that we still think is a setback, and we're still trying to get somewhere.
Well, it's a really important point.
Yeah.
When someone tells me about a setback, one of the first questions I'll ask them is, tell me, how have you been managing to perceive that as a setback until now?
Yeah.
Because it's not acknowledged when they describe it as a setback or a problem, which I understand. I'm not an idiot. I've been around a while. I understand that there are things that can be disappointing or painful or complex or whatever. But I'm also aware that their ability to perceive it as a setback is a creative act happening real time that they're almost certainly not aware of. And so I want them to get back into realizing the truth of that, but also going to the place where the fresh new perceptual reality comes from.
And that comes about, as I understand it, Jamie, from the two pieces of knowledge, understanding that we're sharing and you're talking about. Excuse me. One is that we are creating our entire experience through the power of thought, and it's happening moment to moment.
Oh, including our entire experience of ourselves and how we
Yeah.
think about ourselves and this body and the world. Yeah, the whole shoot.
So it's a huge point. It's a one sentence, but it's a huge, insightful shift in our understanding of who we are and what we are. And then the second part of it was really, you were saying, understanding who we truly are.
Yeah.
What I'm going to sort of overlay with that and just check with you on your thoughts is that what we truly are is resilience and capacity and potential and wellness and the opportunity for new thought, and also within that, fantastic capacity to make decisions, be connected, be creative, be loving, be compassionate, the sense of humanity that we all know and sense and feel. So I'm just imagining you, because it happened for me, I don't know if it's the same for you, but in that situation at the beginning of 2020, the initial kind of, oh my God, goodness moment. And then remembering that you're creating the experience through thought and remembering that you're fine and ace and awesome And
I,
and
I
and,
can't
and then you
remember, but
added the word.
I imagine step two was something like that. And Jonathan, I loved everything you said in your description of who we really are. I'd go one step deeper, which is I say, who we really are is the source of all that.
Uh-huh.
Can I finish with a very hippie quote? Because I've got to go in a couple of minutes.
Sure
Um,
thing. We've got 2 minutes.
so my way of thinking about it, there's a quote by Teilhard de Chardin, which I like to bastardize, which goes like this. I'll tell you my bastardized version to save time. We're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're one spiritual being having 8 billion human experiences. And who you really are is that one spiritual being. Who you really are is consciousness itself. Who you really are is the wisdom and intelligence behind life. And the reason I'm so resolute in pointing people in that direction is because if you get a glimpse of that and have a feeling of that, it's something beyond concepts and beliefs and ideas. And it comes with a beautiful feeling. You know, there's a way in which how I see my role as a coach these days is to be a mirror that allows my clients to catch a glimpse of who they really are. And when they catch a glimpse of who you really are, that comes with a feeling. And it's the feeling, the beautiful feeling of remembering who you are on the inside. And my dear friend and mentor and colleague, Chip Chipman, passed away a couple of months ago, but he used to say, the feeling you're living in is all you get.
Mm-hmm.
It's all you get. And so it makes sense to prioritize, to whatever extent you can, living in a beautiful feeling for life now, living in the feeling of who you really are now, because that's going to that's going to imbue everything in your life with that feeling and the wisdom and guidance that comes with it. Peace out,
mate. Peace up, man. And I'm just gonna end and just cap that really and say thank you so much. And I know that anybody who is in that place of really feeling connected with that part in them will find it incredibly easy to find a really great lawnmower shop. That was a new lawnmower. So and deal with any setback that comes their way. Jamie, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been a huge pleasure, and thanks again for inviting me, Jonathan.
See you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for your attention. I look forward to seeing you soon.